Good evening. It is Tuesday, October 25th, around 6 p.m. in New York, 4 p.m. in Wyoming. And here's to another amazing episode of Foundations of Development with Professor Michael DeNobili. I'm your host, Michael DeNobili, and today we are going to talk about Bandura. But before we get there, I have a couple of announcements to make. No, I'm not getting married. And then we're going to get to the roadmap, and then we're gonna get to Bandura. I don't know why I want to sing Dora the Explorer every time I hear the name Bandura, but I'm gonna keep myself together. So a couple of announcements. As we said last week, we switched up 2 weeks ago. We switched up the syllabus. So these are the dates and where we're going over the next few weeks. So this week we're looking at Bandura, which, knowing last week, I completely apologize for exam 2. Bandura should not have been shuffled through the mix. Bandura should have just stayed where Bandura was. Bandura should have been put back into Bandura's box. But Bandura has been let out. Bandura is now this week, and we're just going to move forward with it. So read chapter 9. It's a 20 pages, a really short chapter, but a really good chapter. Next week, from Halloween to November 6th, we're going to look at Freud, probably the most influential in educational psychology, besides Darwin. I feel in how we see the human being and development. Piaget and Bandura are really big guns, if you will. They're there as well. We're then going to spend 2 weeks on Erickson, not because I want to spend 2 weeks on Erickson. That's just how it landed on the schedule, how it landed on the calendar. I think it allows us. It's a really long chapter, and it allows us to like recharge. I feel like we've been running a marathon the last few weeks. Then we're going to look at Young from November 28th to December 4th. And then we're going to have a flex week from December 5th to December 11th. I'm going to see that as a catch-up week, and I'm also going to put together an extra credit module. I may take another chapter from the textbook. I don't know what I'm going to do yet with that, but that's going to be an opportunity to earn some more extra credit. And then your final exam is going to run from December 12th to December 16th. We only got a few more weeks, guys. We're more than halfway done. Assignments coming down the pike. I reopened exam 2 until Friday, October 28th. So if you need to do it, do it. Do exam 2. And I am accepting text corrections for exams 1 and 2. Where you can earn half the points you missed back. So here's how it works. I'll explain it again. So you handwrite the question in its entirety, and you handwrite the answer, not A, B, C, D, but the full answer in its entirety. You handwrite it, then you take a picture, and then you email it to me. And then I'll bump your grade up. For exam 2, because of the mishap with Bandura, I have to go in, check to see who got the Bandura questions correct and incorrect. If you got any of the Bandura questions incorrect, I'm going to bump your grade up. And then if you submit your test corrections to me, I will give 50% of your points back. So let's say you earned a 50. After all was said and done, you got a 50 out of 100. You missed 50 points. I'll give you 25 back after you do test corrections, which bumps it up to a 75. If you got a 70, you missed 30 points. So you do test corrections. I give you 15 back. So it bumps it up to an 85. If you got a 90 and you want to do test corrections, you missed 10 points. I give you 5 back and bump it up to a 95. All depends on how many points you want to do. Reflection 3 is due November 6th. I'll cover that next week. I'll post it beforehand, but I'm gonna discuss it. I'm gonna discuss it next week because it's due next Sunday. Homework 3 is due November 20th. Your final reflection paper is due December 4th, and then your final exam is due December 16th. If you have any questions, please reach out. If you have been MIA, please reach out. We'll figure out something. Just got to talk to me. That's what it comes down to. And now to our map. We're at the bottom with Big Al Bandura and social learning theory. He's an intersectionist where he takes on both nature and nurture in his theory, and we're gonna cover that today as well. There's Al. He just passed away in 2020, not too long ago. He was born in 1925. He passed away last July. It was 2021. At the age of 95. Worked up to the day of his death. He was still working all the way through. He's Canadian. Happened into psychology almost by chance. If you read the textbook, he would travel to the University of British Columbia with some of his friends, and he had an extra period. So he's like, oh, I'm going to take another class. What's this class? Psychology. And he takes the class. And as they say, the rest is history. Went on to get his doctorate at the University of Iowa. Then he joined the staff at Stanford University in the early 1950s. And he's been there ever since. I gather up until the day of his death. There you go. So here we go. Bandura's influences, Sears, Benton, and others. So he studied with Robert Sears, a pioneer in the field of social learning. Sears was interested in family antecedents of behavior. Family antecedents means relatives from the past. His work, Sears's work influences our thinking today regarding how bullies become bullies and family aggression patterns. Typically what Sears found was that a bully typically comes from a family of bullies. That's pretty sound research. He did work with Arthur Benton. Bandura studied mental phenomena such as imagery and representation. He developed the concept of reciprocal determination, the mutual relationship between an agent and its environment, which relates back to epigenetics, if you remember that from an earlier module. This marked a radical departure from the dominant behaviorism of the time, which we'll get to, which we won't get to next week because we already went to it. Those are Dr. Russo's notes that we'll get to it next week. We already got to it, so we're going to just move forward. So why is Bandura important to educators? He successfully put the how we learn squarely in the middle between nature and nurture. And because he brought in the tangible mental states that people like Skinner will reject. So Skinner rejected the cognitive functions related to behavior, but Bandura said there's got to be thinking going on. So he was able to put together the two sides in a theory, even though you'll have other theorists who will criticize Bandura's theory, but he brings the two sides together. Learning, he said, is a gradual process in which organisms must act in order to learn. Very similar to Montessori and Piaget. However, beware the debate between Piagetians and Bandurians about whether or not learning is spontaneous or not. Piaget said that spontaneous interest is what leads to our learning. But Bandura said we learn because it gets us praise. Um, Responses to what we do are shaped by consequences, even if they may not be like rewards and punishments in the traditional sense. Praise is a form of reward. So therefore, there is a little bit of operant conditioning of like Pavlov and Skinner here with Bandura. Um, and it's very interesting because I think I would have to agree, me personally, going through like my teaching career, I kind of like Bandura. I kind of have to agree with Bandura in terms of what gets students wanting to learn. Uh it's models, and we're going to talk about modeling very soon, but it's models of passion. If you're passionate about the subject, students start become interested. So like you engage students not only by applying their interests, but if you're passionate about the subject, like English, I am an English teacher. I love English. I'm passionate about it, but I know it's boring for 99% of the human population. But if I'm not passionate about it in class, none of my kids are going to want to learn it. So I really appreciate Bandura here. Um, then we come to the Bobo doll experiment. Observation is critical in social situations. We learn most rapidly by observing the behavior of others. This is what I'm talking about with modeling. Observation teaches us probable consequences. Um, the Bobo doll experiment was about imitative learning. So they had a um, a volunteer basically uh, was recorded beating up a Bobo doll. A Bobo doll is an old inflatable doll, and then the kids imitated this behavior without being told, encouraged, or rewarded. In total contrast to the behaviorist approach that all behavior is directed by reinforcements and rewards. Sometimes a kid is just going to see somebody do something and they're like, I'm going to copycat that because maybe they're playing and I want to play too. Maybe they're not thinking of like, I want to be violent right now, but they may be thinking more in the sense of they're playing and I want to play too, and they look like they're having fun but not really thinking of the morality behind it. If you want to learn more about the Bobo doll experiment, I've attached the YouTube video there. Observation teaches us probable consequences. So let's think about this for a second. Does televised violence increase tendencies toward the same, or does it have no effect? What about video games? I would probably say, Michael speaking right now, I think it depends on the individual. I mean, I can watch very violent TV shows, I can play very violent video games, but I'm not going to go out. Like, I played Grand Theft Auto when I was a kid. It doesn't mean I'm going to do Grand Theft Auto on Friday night. As if you heard the police officer, they're on to me. They know they know where I live. I actually live right around the corner from a police station. Little bit of trivia right there. The fact is that online anything has consequences. So there was a study published in 2018. The happiest teens use smartphones, digital media less than an hour a day. Are they happier because they are observing less? Are they happier because they're not, I know that I would play video games all night when I was younger and I would wake up miserable the next day. Not so much that I was tired, but just burnt. My eyes were burnt. So I think it's a mixture of things. I think it's more complicated than it seems. But I do think it depends on the individual. Certain individuals are more likely to lash out after watching violence on television, and others not. However, at the same time, I do think that there's a level of desensitization, and that's where the probable consequences are. Um, there's a certain level of accepting certain violent behavior. So, for example, I think it's very strange how there's a lot of weird things going on here in New York City on people being recorded doing them, like on the subway, and you have people who are just sitting around doing nothing, like, oh, this is a normal Saturday night. Somebody getting beat up on the subway. I'm just gonna sit here and pretend it's not happening. Um, I'm not saying that the television show has done that. I just think that our culture has desensitized us after seeing things over and over again, and we've just accepted up this is normal. Um, so that's my personal thing on that. The basics of Bandura continued. Was he organismic? Got the word down finally. Was he organismic, mechanistic, or interactionist? He's definitely organismic, in the sense that there are tendencies waiting to be awakened. Yes, he's mechanistic. That is, the organism is externally influenced in the sense that as people become socialized, they depend less on the external rewards and punishments and increasingly regulate their own behavior. You might say they evolve. That's another way of looking at it. And the two interact, hence, he's an interactionist. What develops? As children learn, they are learning in order to receive reinforcement such as praise. I know a lot of times my students are more engaged when they hear things like, I'm proud of them, or that was very insightful, or you're showing great effort. I think this has a lot to do with positive mindset. Um, Praise isn't a bad thing as long as it's being used for con- constructive purposes. Cognitions develop, called rivulets, when new behavior is acquired through observation alone. The learning appears to be cognitive. So, what Bandura showed was that you don't have to tell a student something to learn, they just got to look at you. You know, um, they learn through observation. We learn through observation. That's kind of like the premise of the social sciences is learning through observation. Young children, young people, young adults, they learn through observation. The models, they're going to follow the models that are most meaningful to them. And we're going to talk more about that later on today. Observational learning is imitative learning with socialization as the catalyst. We watch and listen, and like Jung's introjections, we'll get to that later on in the Jungian module. We onboard how people interact with their world. Socialization processes are at work here, but more broadly, it is society's attempts to promote acceptable social behavior, such as containing aggression and promoting cooperation. One of the things that's interesting, though, is that do you teach it through word or you teach it through modeling? How do you teach containing aggression and promoting cooperation? It's mainly through socialization, the interaction of people. But studies show that it's more modeling. We model good behavior, and therefore others are going to model that good behavior as well. Pro-social and antisocial behavior, as we've seen with Bandura. Bandura was interested in the extent to which children learn to either contain their aggressive impulses or to express them. Cathect is the root of the word catharsis. Catharsis, meaning a release of emotion in socially acceptable ways. He found that aggression is learned through imitation, A certain freedom to act is acquired. Disinhibition occurs when the child feels free to act aggressively, but also pro-socially. I would say this is the role of sports. Sports allows children to freely act aggressively in a pro-socially manner. They get to release cathartically some of those aggressive um, natures about them. We see this with martial arts. We see this with many different things. Sometimes those video games are cathartic. Sometimes those violent video games is a way for young people to release that aggressive energy. Models clearly influence both pro and antisocial behavior, and after a time, the child, now an adolescent, will begin to regulate his or her own behavior without regard to the models or the reward. So over time, after absorbing, oh, this, that, the child will over time say, this is how I'm going to behave now. This brings us to self-regulation, begets self-efficacy. The establishment of internal standards of behavior is what happens now. As I said, I'm going to behave as I want to now. This brings about self-reward and self-punishment. The role of shame would be a factor here. So the child, at some point, after the development of some level of personal conscience and personal morality, will then self-reward and self-punish. But it was Bandura's interest in how we go about evaluating our own performances that would drive his research at this point, starting with the influence of models. He found that we adopt the self-evaluative standards of peers, a course of least resistance of sorts. The higher performing the peer group is, the better for the child. So what he was saying here is that between adults and peers, young people tend to follow peers more than adults. This is important to know. This is why peer tutoring is very successful. Yes, I can tutor a child and I can help them pass an exam, but peer tutoring in some cases can be more effective because a child is more likely to listen to another child than they are to listen to an adult. That's all that's saying there. Self-evaluative capacity. So this notion of taking on the evaluative standards of a peer group awakens in us a capacity for adjusting those standards. Children, principally older children and adolescents, then compare their performance to their standards and arrive at either a deficit or a surplus. Adjustment occurs, and sometimes more than is needed, sometimes less. If more than is needed, frustration can result. Frustration is therefore addressed using baby steps or sub-goals. It is a never-ending process, a back and forth of capacity adjustment for this self-evaluative capacity. Now, self-efficacy. Self-regulation is a process of self-observation. Bandura called this a capacity for self-referent thought. The process he called self-efficacy appraisal. The appraisals are context-specific and work to inform motivation. So, in other words, the individual appraisals or measures where they're at, and then this will inform their motivation or engagement in that behavior. When they're good at something, motivation increases. When not so good, motivation abates. The role of the teacher is to contextualize the good and not so good. Because if they're not so good, then how can the teacher prop up the student to help them motivate themselves to become good? That's the role of the teacher. When the child is in a deficit, how do you get them to a surplus? How do you prop them up? That's now that's not self-efficacy, that's the teacher's efficacy to push them. But how do you get the teacher to push them so that they can get to that level of self-efficacy? So self-efficacy appraisals have four sources. One is the actual performance. Remember last week with Vygotsky, that zone of proximal development. When we're good at something, we are repeatedly reinforced. We are then ready to move to the next challenge. Once we've developed a robust sense of self-efficacy, we are not too troubled by setbacks. The key is to not take on a challenge at the wrong time, and that's the role of the teacher. The role of the teacher is to set up the challenges in such a way that the child will be building on the previous challenge instead of getting multiple setbacks. Vicarious experience is another way for self-efficacy appraisal. If we see others succeed, we infer that we can do it too. So, for example, this is where praise, like Bandura was talking about, this is where it involves. If I want my students to come into a classroom, sit down, take out their stuff, and start their do now, I have two choices. I can harp on all the ones who are doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. Or I can focus on the ones who are doing it correctly and praise them, and they're doing good, because what slowly but surely happens is that majority of the others, seeing you praise the other students, they'll start falling into line because they want to get praised too. They want to be told that they're doing good. So if you're telling them this is model behavior, they're going to infer that I can do that too, and I can earn that praise too. The relative efficacy of our peer group is important, and think grade level there as well. Verbal persuasion or pep talks. The assumption made at this point is that we are still within our zone of proximal development, and success depends more on the effort we put into a task than on an inherent ability. Point here is this: verbal persuasion can still work. Even though models are effective, verbal persuasion can still work. And then there is the physiological cues. Body cues might tell us that we've moved outside of the zone of proximal development. I can't run a marathon in my current condition. To try would be suicide, and the cues would confirm that. Better to identify that which I can achieve. Now, that does not mean that in a year from now, if I condition myself that I can't run a marathon, it just means right now in this moment, I can't run a marathon. So those physiological cues can help us as well. Our main takeaways: as educators, we're called to be interactionists. We should not be pure nature or pure nurture. We are called to understand the entire child is a product of both nature and nurture. We recognize that there appears to be an innate interest in tackling moderately level novel events, as Piaget teaches us, but we also recognize that praise is indeed a catalyst, as Bandura taught us. Like we saw with Vygotsky, Bandura established how socialization is constantly at work. He established the power of the peer. Self-efficacy is a fragile thing and must be reinforced, but eventually it is internalized and built upon. A lot of the things that you've seen with a lot of these theorists is a lot of external things that are then internalized, and this internalization is really what allows us to become adults and continue learning as adults. A lot of times we see issues when those internalizations don't happen. I just wanted to share this note because a lot of you know that I love Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl said that morality cannot be taught, that it must be lived, and that students see different ways in which role models, such as teachers or parents, live out their morals, and then students choose who they wish to model after. That's very Bandurian. Bandura said that like we could speak morals, but the problem is that it doesn't last long. What lasts long is having models, having role models of different types of moral living or different types of standards of living. So if we want our kids to do good, we got to be good. That's pretty much what Bandura found out. If we fall into the trap of do as I say and not as I do, there's young people are going to see that we're hypocrites, and they're just going to do whatever their own thing is. Now, with that said, I'm not saying that the point is to shape young people into what we want to make them. What I'm saying is that we shouldn't worry too much, just like some of our theorists have said. Live your lives, and students will have models and standards of how they can live theirs, but they're going to be the ones to choose it in the end. And that's really all I have to say about that. I'll leave you with these quotes from Bandura. Self-belief does not necessarily ensure success, but self-disbelief assuredly spawns failure. This is from his Self-Efficacy, the Exercise of Control. If self-efficacy is lacking, people tend to behave ineffectually, even though they know what to do. This is where we get learned helplessness. This is from Self-Efficacy, Mechanism and Human Agency. And this last quote, persons who have a strong sense of efficacy deploy their attention and effort to the demands of the situation and are spurred by obstacles to greater effort. And with that, I'm going to go into the little black void of PowerPoint, and I look forward to our next lecture next week. Enjoy your evening, enjoy your week, and if I don't hear from you, happy Halloween. Have a good day, guys.